I'm Natalie Alexander. Welcome to AI and Multilateralism, a playlist at the UN Library and Archives, Geneva, where we're joined by experts who help us unpack the many ideas at the nexus of AI and international cooperation. The environmental impact of AI systems is becoming clearer and increasingly discussed. What if we went beyond this to question how the success of AI is dependent on the Earth's resources? In this episode, I speak with Martín Tironi Rodó, Director of FAIR, the Futures of Artificial Intelligence Research Nucleus, based in Latin America. He's also the sociologist of the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. He explores why artificial intelligence is interconnected with planetary intelligence and calls for more research, agency, and leadership across Chile and Latin America in shaping the future of AI. Martín, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for the invitation.
I'll start firstly with your work. You're a sociologist, and your work, your research spans from sustainable mobility and smart cities to digital technologies and also design anthropology. I'm curious what led you to your work as director at FAIR.
So FAIR, the Nucleus FAIR, was created with the aim to opening a critical interdisciplinary space to try to analyze, to explore the social, cultural, environmental impact of artificial intelligence. So in a way, our assumption was the discussion about this technology, about the acceleration and the implementation of this technology in the context of Chile, in Latin America, was strongly shaped by a techno-solutionist logic and by a certain fascination with the promises of innovation associated with this technology. So we create this nucleus with different researchers from social science, design, philosophy, literature, engineering, in response to this scenario that I described before. And our objective was to expand the conversation by bringing all this discipline, this space, to try to interrogate AI as a complex phenomenon. And maybe one of the most important approach that we try to explore is the idea that artificial intelligence must be understood as a total social fact. This is a notion by Marcel Mauss, a French anthropologist. So in other words, the scope of AI cannot be reduced to the development of models or systems, but we need to examine, to interrogate its social, ecological, cultural, political, and economical impact. So in the FAIR Nucleus, we try to go beyond AI as a simple new tools and try to understand the transformative agency that is reshaping our way of life and our way of govern and experience the reality.
It's really interesting you say that, because generally when we read about AI and think about it and have these discussions, a lot of it is related to how can it make us more productive? How can it make us more innovative? What I found also interesting in the mission of FAIR is that your work is not here to celebrate AI as an all-encompassing solution to our issues, and nor is it meant to be super fatalistic. I found it really interesting that it's there to help us recognize benefits, but also identify limits, like you mentioned. What kind of projects and collaborations are you focusing on at the moment?
Yeah. So maybe before to move into the different project that I am developing right now, perhaps a good place to begin is by saying that one of the most important invitations that we have tried to unfold is a shift from human-centered AI to a planet-centered AI. So artificial intelligence needs to be rethink in light of ecological crisis and the planetary condition. This means understanding that AI is not just a huge of data, is not an immaterial or autonomous technology, but one embedded in an energy system, mineral extraction, water use, logic network, and environmental transformation, and community territories. So we think that at a time of climate instability and ecological devastation or ecological limits that we are living, the key question is not only what AI can develop, but what kind of walls it enable, intensify, or make possible. So in another way, I think that it's very important to explore what I call more than human interdependencies that AI generate with the planet. That means the entanglements with water and mineral ecosystem, also infrastructure like data center, and also form of life that sustain and are very affected by this computational intelligence. So I think that in our approach, it's very important to understand that this computational intelligence actually has a strong dependency on the planetary intelligence. And with planetary intelligence, I am thinking on the intelligence of soil, ecosystem, water, energy, and multi-terrestrial process that make possible the existence of this artificial intelligence. So I think that in our work, we try to interrogate this dominant narrative based on human-centered AI and explore alternative way of thinking and visualizing how we can coexist with this technology. So to respond to your question about the different projects that we are developing, we have worked on different projects that trying precisely to reflect on the relationship between AI and the Earth. So it's important to say that, so my background is as a sociologist, but I do work at the School of Design in the Católica University. So in my work, I try to combine this like more traditional social science work in papers, book, but at the same time, I develop installation, intervention. So now I'm going to a little bit describe the installation that I am developing since 5-6 years from now, trying to reveal the terrestrial interdependencies of this technology with the ecosystem. So with my colleague, Manuela Garreton, we designed an installation called Hybrid Ecology. It's an installation that was exhibited first in Chile, in Santiago, and last year in the Venice Biennale. So in the case of the installation in Santiago, what we did was to try to make visible or make tangible the water required for AI to generate one image. So each time a visitor entered to the room and produce an AI generate image, 32 milliliters of water fell from a sphere made by mycelium. So then I can show you image if you want. So through this exhibition, Hybrid Ecology, we try to recognize and make visible the relationship between AI and water. And we think that making visible the water consumed in the production of one image, we are trying to disrupt, we're trying to criticize this illusion of immateriality in this dominant narrative of AI as an immaterial technology, but also it's an invitation to terrestrialize its mode of existence of this technology. So this was in the case of Santiago in 2023. And last year in the Venice Biennale, we made, also with Manuela Garreton, we made a more speculative installation. In this intervention, we propose a reflection on how AI can begin to repair its ecological responsibility to our water ecosystem. So we create an intervention in which we train a generative model using different properties, different capacity associated with intelligence of water. So we create around 50 different concepts related to the water intelligence. And we ask AI to imagine to learn, to represent form of intelligence inspired by the flow, by the memories, by the adaptive capacity and relational dynamic of water. So that was a speculative intervention in which AI was creating a kind of reciprocity with the ecosystem, with the earth. And finally, now we are preparing another exhibition, also with Manuela, and it's an exhibition that tries to visualize the link between AI and rare earth minerals that now are very famous. But there is in Chile, there is a place called Penco. It's a town in south of Chile that are receiving a lot of attention because there is a project of exploring rare earth elements. So beyond analyzing the social environmental controversies surrounding the extraction of this mineral in Penco, we are interested in showing how a technology, AI, that often is perceived as immaterial and ethereal, in fact, depend on deep ecological process, extractive supply chain, and material infrastructure that make it possible. So in this exhibition called Bajo Nuestros Pies, that is going to be launched in 2 months in Museo Precolombian Museum, we invite audiences to terrestrialize AI, like earth-bounding AI, to explore possible form of coexistence between computational intelligence and terrestrial intelligence. So to try to summarize what we are doing with Manuela, we are in a way creating methods for grounding AI. So ways of sustaining artificial intelligence within the territories, ecological and material process that sustain it. So we try to go beyond this abstract description or approach of AI and seek to mapping the alliances, the relationship and the friction and maybe the form of collaboration between AI and the earth. So this is what I am working right now.
Super interesting. And I think while there is a lot more discussion now on the environmental impact of AI development and deployment, like water use, I learned a lot from your interventions in the book by Karen Howe, Empire of AI, on the huge amounts of water that is being used for example, data centers in Chile. But what you're saying there is it's not just a matter of discussing the environmental impacts, but the actual interdependencies of AI with the environment and how we can draw upon this territorial intelligence. Super interesting. Coming back to the work of FAIR as it relates to Chile and Latin America, it's also there to guide policies on AI and the rights of people and the environment. What would you say is the state of regional space and perspectives in the global discussions on AI governance today?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and it's a very complex issue. I believe that there is an interesting paradox today in our reality in Latin America about AI. Because on the one hand, we have now more visibility in the global discussion on artificial intelligence. So there are national strategies. For instance, Chile, we develop a national strategy to think and to orient the AI development. We have also regulatory framework. We have research centers like FAIR, but also there is the National Center of AI called CENIA, and an increasingly active community of academic, civic society, and public institutions that are engaged in this debate. And so I think that now Latin America are no longer a region completely absent from this debate. But the paradox for me is that on the other hand, many of the analytical categories and many of the models through which AI is discussed are still largely defined in the global north, especially in the United States, Europe, and now with China. So that means that the region often participates in the conversation, but not necessarily on its own terms. There is much discussion about algorithm biases, transparency, governance, that are, of course, fundamental issues, But other questions that are central for Latin America remained less visible or less discussed. I mean, like, for instance, structural inequalities, data extractivism, technological dependency, the concentration of digital infrastructure, the environmental impact, and the linguistic and cultural diversity of our region and our territories. In that sense, the CENIA, the National Center of Artificial Intelligence in Chile, is doing a very relevant work to try to develop a robust infrastructure around AI in Chile. And for example, CENIA, the National Center of AI, it has developed a chat GPT LATAM, seeking to foster a degree of sovereignty in the global debate about AI. And in FAIR, we have also, instead to try to use the same categories that are inform the AI narrative, we are trying to situate AI and think about the effect, the stories, the territory that are based in Latin America. So I think that the current reality in Latin America is ambivalent. So there is more Latin America voices than before, but the presence still needs to be more, to develop a real capacity to shape agendas, standard, infrastructure, and technological future. So this is my diagnostic about the situation.
And like you said, a lot of the policy, but also the platforms and the systems that are being deployed around the world are designed elsewhere. Like you said, how do you think then that we can bring what you said about having more agency and having more capability coming from Latin America and Chile so that the region can also shape and help decide on the kinds of systems they want for their futures?
Yeah. So I think that developing agency from Latin America means moving beyond being merely users or recipient territory, like passive territory, and trying to develop the drivers and the tools to becoming actor with the capacity to participate in what you say, the shaping and designing of more inclusive, sustainable future around AI. One of the great challenges of this developing of this technology, and especially in our region, is how to open up the black box of this system and stop being just passive recipient of this technology future defined by others. But at the same time, I think this requires the development of local capacity for research and for developing infrastructure. So expanding the opportunity not only for for science and engineering, but also for humanity and art. For me, it's very important to recognize the role of art and humanity in the debate and the way of AI is shaping. Because too often, in the context of AI development, those fields like art, humanity, are seen as a secondary or merely decorative dimension, So first is engineering and then is going to be, design. But I think that the possibility of imagining different AI or the possibility to generate a techno-diversity around this technology or alternative form of artificial intelligence depends precisely on the critical, projective, disrupting way of approaching that humanity, design, and art can provide. So this is why it's very important to create space of interdisciplinary to think this total social fact that is AI.
Really interesting. I'm going to touch a bit now on what you said about research capacity, because at FAIR, you have 3 areas of research focus, 1 being AI, social justice and citizenship, 2 being AI, cultural imaginaries and futures design, and 3 on AI experimentation and responsible innovation. We could, of course, cover talking about all those areas. But what I would like to ask you is through these research areas, I mean, your goal is also to come up with kind of evidence-based recommendations for new systems that are, like you said, informed by more than just the technological or innovative aspects, but also social justice. How can then we make this happen? What kinds of experiments do you think are most promising to help us come up with recommendations that are really informed by social justice?
Yeah, maybe I believe that one of the central challenges today is to open up the field of what is possible in the development of AI. It's not enough to make current system more efficient. We also need to rethink how we want to live alongside technologies that will increasingly have agency in our way of life. So the challenge is not only in the regulatory dimension, but also, I will say, relational talent. What kind of alliances, what kind of relationship we want to build with this form of intelligence, and under what value or futures. In that sense, the experiments that interest me the most at the moment are those that trying to move AI away from a purely corporative or extractive logic to a models oriented to common good, collaborative interaction, reciprocity with the ecosystem, social justice. The question that is interesting to me is how to design a more situated AI, one that is sensitive to the local context, to our history, and material interdependencies.
Yeah. And so coming then to a question of governance, because we see governance frameworks almost everywhere now. Soft governance, a few examples of hard governance. At the UN level, we also have these two bodies that were just established last year, the Scientific Panel on AI and also the Global Dialogue on AI. So two kind of different bodies looking at how we can work more collectively on these questions. How can we bring the research of FAIR and also, as you mentioned, other public policy institutes and research institutes into these structures to make sure that the work that you're doing becomes really impactful for your region, but also is more known globally?
Yeah, I think that one of the requires is linked to try to create more strong bridges between research, state, and civil society. The knowledge that we produce in FAIR, Nucleus, and other research center must to think the way to be translated into public evidence or to recommendation, regulatory framework, and try to create a space for dialogue between institutions and communities affected by AI and researcher centers. So I think we need to create a more strong conversation between private companies that are developing AI, state, social society, and researcher that can bring more slow down reflection on this. At Latin America level, we need, I think, to expand the collaboration among countries and share agendas that strengthen our capacity for scientific, technological, and regulatory development. We also need to expand our ability to explore possibility that this technology can bring to our reality, according, of course, to our social, cultural, and ecological needs. So I think that this means not limiting ourselves only to consuming, to buy the system design elsewhere, as you say in your question, but trying to bring our local capacity for research to develop infrastructure, creation, and governance in order to imagine more just and sustainable technology trajectories.
What would be then your hope for FAIR in the coming years with regard to that? Are there things that you would really like to see achieved?
Wow.
I'm sure you have a lot of things you want to do.
I think that maybe one of the idea that I am very engaged right now, that is something that is developing through my papers, but also through my intervention, is trying to interrogate this notion of generative capacity. So everybody is now talking about generative AI and its capacity to produce text, image, code, and prediction. So everybody is talking about generative AI. But one of the things that maybe we can bring as a region that we are not completely rationalized like Europe or the United States, it's that generative capacity of AI depends on what I call planetary generative, that is terrestrial form of generativity wrought in geological formation that provide minerals, hydrological cycles, energy system, ecosystem, and also human labor that sustain and is always work beyond this infrastructure. In that sense, generative AI is not generated from nothing. So I think it's very important to recognize that this generative, to try to visualize or visibilize this generative planetary and try to show how this computational generative capacity have its limit if it's not recognized the Earth system that make it possible. So the key question then is not only what AI can generate for us, but what kind of planetary condition it requires transform in order to sustain our possibility to live in this planet.
And I don't think that's a question that's really being asked much these days.
No.
I think we're more focused on, wow, it's getting faster, it's getting bigger, it's getting, If people are interested to know more, do you have an open access resource that you can point them to?
We have the website of FAIR, in which we share research, publication, and public project that we are developing. We just launched a conceptual cartography of AI. It's an open access glossary that bring the different concepts that we are using to think AI. And also we have with Manuela Garreton a website in which you find information about the installation in the Venice Biennale about hybrid ecology called Ecologias Híbridas. Hybrid ecology is the name of the website. So this is what I can share.
Thank you so much. We'll make sure to put those resources in the show notes. I wish you all the best, Martin, as you continue your work at FAIR, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for the wonderful interview.